All right. Hey, everybody. Well, what a fantastic panel that was, and frankly, what a great segue it's going to be as we move into this discussion with this great group of executives, representing a lot of the same thought leadership as we just went through in the past discussion. But first, gratitude. Couldn't be more appreciative of Xcel Energy, all of the support and work that they're doing. Wendell, Tanya, the entire team, is hosting us here in Minneapolis. It's been a fantastic event. Of course, to UBBA, Bobby, the UBBA board, again, I know we got a few more hours left just to get through here today, but it's been a fantastic activity, and I think it'll go down again in the history book of just a fantastic event. Of course, the utilities, seeing 35 different utilities, in attendance and participating in this conversation is inspiring. Thank you for your commitment, and participation, exploring, this very important set of topics as we progress grid modernization and clean energy, embrace the role of digital foundations with telecommunications, and of course to the ecosystem. Couldn't do this without you, and super proud of all the activity and look forward to some of the Plug Fest here this afternoon. So let's get kick-started here. So joining me today, in this executive panel are executives from Xcel Energy. Tanya Fiedler, thank you so much for joining us. Charles King, Tanya is the VP of Application Delivery with Xcel Energy. Charles King, the SVP and CTO with Evergy. And directly to my left here is Ken Price, the Chief Operating Officer with Lower Colorado River Authority. So to get started, to set this up a little bit, I think we can agree, generally, and it's been a topic of a lot of the conversations, that utilities collectively, are under increasing pressure to act, right? To take charge, to make decisions, to progress the various initiatives that we've got, facing us, and ultimately making sure that that critical infrastructure is ready to meet a variety of goals and objectives and sometimes risks, in the realm of clean energy, hardening, resiliency, storm and environmental impacts. And I think what we've talked a lot about in the use cases here today is just now how pervasive data, digital technologies, visibility and communications is as our foundations to be able to ready ourselves and the nation's industries to meet some of these challenges. Obviously unique with these three panelists today, I take a lot of pride in saying that we work with these folks, but they've taken action, right? And I think we're here to really talk about how to help other utilities take action, take some of these important steps forward. And just as the previous panel discussed, sometimes it takes being bold, sometimes it takes foresight and the ability to be able to look forward in terms of how we drive those decisions for progress for the utilities. So jumping in, we're going to break up our conversation into three high-level sections. Time permitting, absolutely intending to go out to the audience for questions and have some engagement there. But let's get started. So the first piece I wanted to focus on is a little bit more from the executive's perspective of that decision-making process. How did we get here? What types of things ultimately influence that decision-making from their seats? And then we'll talk a little bit more about kind of the collectivity and the benefits of that. So by my math, one thing that's interesting with these folks is, and apologize for the Anterix mathematics, but we've got, kind of utility number 3, 4, and 5 here, which I think is a fascinating way to think about it, benefiting both from the experiences of those before them and playing a very important role, in terms of helping the next to come up. But so let's start there. Charles, maybe you can kick us off. We spoke actually a couple of weeks back, and you mentioned a fascinating point that I think would be beneficial to share with this group. So when we were talking about what moved you forward and why you moved forward, with private LT on 900 megahertz, you said a statement to the effect that it just made sense to move forward now, instead of looking back later wishing we had done it. We could have chosen to expand our current approach, but from a security perspective, a capital asset perspective, and more, it just made sense to move forward. I love that statement so much. I think you can elaborate on that, though, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure, Ryan. So, yeah, if I go back in time 3 or 4 years ago, right, Alan mentioned the UBBA in Birmingham around about that time frame, right? We were definitely there listening, absorbing, sponging in, trying to figure out what our plan going forward should look like. In parallel, we had business partners talking about grid automation, specifically distribution automation, distribution management. And so we could have looked at that kind of situationally, probably would have been easier, probably would have been more comfortable to approach it in kind of a business as usual tactical fashion, which would have meant do more of the same, generally speaking, which, translated would have been increased commitments to third-party carriers, working in traditional roles to do some device deployment, figuring out how to do some software integration, and kind of perpetuating a historical model. Or take a step back, be a little bit bolder, to your point earlier, Ryan, take some chances, break some glass, if you want to go with that analogy, and try to have a more strategic conversation. And of course, and this point was made on the previous panel, you don't do that in a vacuum. That involves a leadership conversation, both at an officer level and at a board level, given the amount of investment that you're talking about. Because there's lots of factors out there, not the least of which is the regulatory lens, right? Because it's not just an internal decision that you can make in a vacuum. You've got to make a decision that's defendable, that you can explain the vision behind it, right? And then, frankly, you've got to execute on that vision. And it wasn't going to be a story based upon the investment that you could put out there, and at least not for us internally, not take years to show progress towards that vision either, right? It was going to be getting up on the wheel, making some very active near-term commitments and demonstrations of progress towards that. And so JJ's in the audience. He was on the last panel. He's heard me say this. Our goal was not to be the critical path of our distribution automation build-out. It was to be the enabler and be ready for that to be utilized as opposed to being the critical path and that being pointed out, right? So this was a chance to kind of do something from a greenfield approach, which is rare, right? To do something, turn a page, do it new, do it different, but keep those factors into account you just touched on, Ryan, which is business enablement, security as well, have that be foundational, and then also look at it differently from a cost perspective, obviously, and shift some O&M into capital and make that be a strategic asset going forward, not fully knowing what that word strategic was going to be in advance, but recognizing there was a huge opportunity going forward to leverage that on a recurring basis, and keep building upon that as we go forward. Again, from a strategic perspective, JJ mentioned participating in the FCC auction. That's just one reference point of the commitment behind it. That's a little bit of a leap of faith as well. But if there's one thing that's clear, back to the call of action from a utility perspective, is we're going to need more and more bandwidth, more and more connectivity in the field, creating our own version of IoT as we go forward. And we've really got that call to action, I think, as an industry now that we've got to respond to.
That's fantastic. Another way to look at it, Charles, to be honest, knowing you and getting to know you over the last several years, leading from the front, I think, is important as well, right? Kind of taking these technology steps and being able to help use it as an instrument for change and driving the organizations. You made a great comment on the panel yesterday, even about, kind of how it prospects to your role, kind of the migration from the CIO to the CTO. Maybe we'll come back to that, but I think it's a great way to think about the new role, in a modern utility that technology, communications, and digital transitions play that can help be visionary, right? Help be more than just support and service organizations, but really try to drive change in a very proactive and positive way for the outcome. Ken, let's maybe come to you. Similar question in terms of what were your triggers for deciding to move forward, but maybe for everyone's perspective, one thing that I find really intriguing is just how unique LCRA is and the role that you fulfill, what your scope of service is and how that relates, to help others thinking creatively about private LTE.
Sure, Ryan. I've been working on this elevator speech for like 10 years now, so hopefully I get it down. LCRA is a Texas state agency. It's not an agency, excuse me. It's a Texas state government entity It's not an agency. So LCRA doesn't receive any tax revenue from anybody in Texas. We have 3 business units. We have a transmission business unit that, depending on how you measure it, is either second or third largest in Texas. We have a wholesale water supply and flood control unit, the water business, and we have a wholesale power business, which is the responsibility of generating electricity and selling wholesale power to wholesale customers for resale, and then the commodity trading group. So the most interesting thing about it is in the Great Depression, there was no flood control and no power in the hill country of Central Texas. So Congressman Lyndon Johnson said he was the representative from Central Texas. Like, he allegedly, this is a rumor, he made a deal with President Roosevelt to say, you give me money to make my own TVA in Texas, and I'll deliver votes for you from the House of Representatives. And so the deal was done, and so you can think about it as sort of a smaller and more localized Tennessee Valley Authority. But we do have, and my answers today are going to be based on the unregulated side of LCRA, not the regulated side. So roughly 40% of our employees out of 2,300 are regulated, with about 45% of the revenue coming from that, and everything else is unregulated. So we made a conscious decision, because of the other customers we have or could have, to keep this in the unregulated area. So, and I think that Bobby mentioned it, Bobby Sadler in the prior panel mentioned it. So LCRA was, or is, I guess, still one of the, 9 or 10 entities that have a complex system, and that we don't have to move. And in 2014 to 2018, we actually just sort of said, just say no. We reassessed that a couple years ago, and there was really 2 triggers for that. One is when the FCC did that, no more narrowband licenses. We couldn't grow our narrowband system. We have 14, about 7,000 radios on 900 and 7,000 radios on 700. So we were in the business of acquiring some more transmission assets outside the footprint we had our narrowband system on. It's like, okay, now how do we cover that during emergencies or something like that? There's really no communication other than satellite potentially. So the trigger was, we can't expand our system, now what do we do? And the other trigger was, we didn't want to be the last person standing using either Open Sky, we might be that, or P25 system, because I guess based on y'all's effort and a lot of other people's effort in the room here, LT grew. So the trigger was, let's look at that again, because I don't like, we didn't sort of like where we're going to end up at.
Excellent. No, that's great. And we'll come back to actually some of the unique use cases and stuff that LCRA operates in a little bit, but that's super helpful from just a different perspective around the drivers, both from where you were coming from, right, your history, kind of the more telecom-centric operations that you had, as a service provider, and then into the other areas of business opportunity. Tanya, let's come over to you. Slight variation on the question, but first, from the perspective, at least one thing to me, that's quite unique as I think about Xcel and the journey that you've been on. It's just the sheer size and complexity, of your service footprint. The many opcos, 8 states, I believe it is, and that comes with a tremendous amount of work and complexity to align interests and stakeholders and different operating companies and value propositions. So let's talk about decision making for the perspective of kind of bringing stakeholders together. It's clearly important, as Wendell did a great job explaining some of that work and some of the areas of opportunity in the last panel. But can you describe the importance of that to Xcel, and maybe some hints to folks about how you approached it to bring all of those different pieces together?
Happy to. I've been at Xcel for 8 years now, and I've had the opportunity to be a part of multiple transformation programs. We went to SAP GL, we've gone to Salesforce, we did advanced metering, we're obviously doing private LTE. I'm actually also starting a new billing program. And I think one thing that comes in common with all these large transformational programs is it is a full-time job to manage the stakeholders. to figure out who your stakeholders are, to identify them, and to figure out how you bring them along the journey. And it's not something you can just whip together in the last minute. You have to have a really solid plan, and you have to be continually working at it. I love the last panel. I think they touched on this, and I would name 3 people that I start with. The first is the regulatory team. For us at Xcel, quite frankly, you are not going to get anything improved unless you have the regulatory leaders, or we have our OpCo presidents, until they can support that and tell us how we're going to get regulatory approval. And quite frankly, you can't get far without that. So to me, they are the very first person. Unfortunately, a lot of times we forget them. And I just, being honest and transparent, we forget to start with them. And it's a lot of work to do that. So they're number one. The second area that is really important for us that I think we often forget is our capital asset accounting team. Figuring out, how do we capitalize the work? Well, how much things are going to be O&M? Obviously, in utilities, cap and O&M is a big topic, and really planning out in advance how we're going to finance something. What is going to be the accounting funding treatment is a pretty big item in the beginning. And then the last, what somebody else talked about, was security. Boy, if we can have security at the table at the very beginning, even before the beginning, it's all the better for us, right? Of course, there's tons and tons of stakeholders beyond these 3, but those are 3 that I think is really important to get at in the front. And then I also think it's important that throughout the life of the project, whether it's PLT or whatever it is, there is a strong communication plan, because I think we can't expect the leaders at our companies to be able to remember all that's going on, right? So you have to be continually reminding them, this is a big transformational project. Here's what's going on. Here's the next part of our journey. In fact, many of these large projects are multi-year. And so it's a full-time effort, and it's concerted effort to bring all of the leadership that you need and all the stakeholders on that change journey. I think it's very important to success.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it reminds me, and I think everybody can probably have a perspective of, it's change management at its finest, right? Kind of once you get beyond the pieces and the parts, managing change and the process and the stakeholder buy-in. And like I said, you're across a very diverse set of stakeholders, having to do that many, many times through as you work through the different operating companies. So lots, I'm sure, different utilities can learn from what Tanya and the rest of the Xcel team have been focusing on there. Let's switch gears a little bit. I want to now take that, and kind of relate more from the executive's perspective in terms of the value of collaboration, kind of the purpose and context of team, and kind of what that means and how we drive and influence the decision making, and share these valuable practices and lessons learned. Little story, let me bring you kind of what I think of when I think of team. I actually grew up about 6-hour drive north from here, and yes, that puts you in Canada, for those of you looking at a map, but I played a lot of hockey growing up, and so team means something to me. It's a very important part of my values and something that I learned, able to drive it forward, but I think it's completely appropriate to think about in the perspective of how the utilities operate, through having a common set of goals, and having alignment of ambition and priorities, the diversity of talent and ideas, just like any team sport does, to achieve that common set of outcomes, and ultimately having that singular, kind of common set of focuses and goals. And in this space, it's really about using communications and digitization to drive clean, affordable, safe, secured, reliable energy. That sets us up for success in my mind, to be able to have these kind of robust conversations, and thankful for organizations like UBBA to be able to bring us together to have it. But Ken, let's actually start with you. I want to think about it from the perspective of collaboration and innovation. LCRA is headquartered in Austin. Fantastic tech culture, a lot of great innovation, just kind of in the day in and day out there. But talk about how innovation and how collaboration across the industry can aid to ensure we have and continue to have a leading portfolio of technology solutions and support. And you hit on some of this, I think, in terms of what you saw with the development of the different communications technologies and how that helps influence even your decision making. But I'm curious how you think about it today and how you think about it in the future.
Yeah, sure. So I've been in the business like 40 years. 20 of it was in regulated environment, like a standard utility company, and 20 of it was unregulated side of a utility company. So first 20 years, everybody collaborated. You got together, you planned your transmission and distribution system, make sure it all interfaces with everybody. The last 20 years was, we got pretty good at commercial intelligence gathering. like I think Tony, you said yesterday, you didn't go ask Target. I mean, you didn't go ask Walmart what they're doing since you work for Target. And it's like, so now with this business, the telecom business, with the LTE potential, it's back. In my view, it's back to being able to collaborate with everybody. I mean, Ameren and Southern Lake have been gracious enough to help us start our journey, which apparently is one of the meme words for this conference, journey. As Bobby Sadler said, we're just starting it. So we've already had it's more mentoring, I think, than collaboration. But I think when we made the decision, and I think Wendell said that last panel, is like, don't throw the kitchen sink on all the use cases, because all you do is drive up the cost and make the benefits more fuzzy. So we said like, hey, we use all this business case, it's going to cost us $180 million. And like, I wasn't in this role at the time, but I was going to have to pay for some. It was like, oh no, we're not doing that. So we cut it down to say, what can we really do? And so we decided that the LTE was the right approach, the strategic approach. It might be a little bit more risky, but it was the strategic approach. And it's sort of the two biggest technical risks we have is we have to have mission critical push to talk to replace what we have today. And really the NPV of the decision hinges on AMI and cell usage for AMI. So we're fixing to put out our RFP for our main core and RAN stuff at the end of the month. A lot of people are working on that. We're partnering with everybody. I think one of our guys, Spencer, sitting over there, I joked last night, we had a dance card that was full of talking to people. So we appreciate all the input, and we are dependent upon the collaboration with everybody to actually pull this off for us.
Yeah, that's some great points. I mean, one thread I'll pull on a little bit, kind of to the longevity side of it, right? And there's one reason why you don't have to overbake your thought process in day one. I think we've been successful now finding a set of globally adopted standards that can help make and drive that forward compatibility, right? I think we've all seen it, with a lot of the other systems out there. But how much did that play into, kind of thinking to forward, right? Being able to build off of a foundation like this?
And that's really interesting. So, I mean, obviously LTE we think is going to be around a long time. Yeah. But internal to LCRA, since we're only wholesale, there's only 3 major use cases. Only 3, and that didn't tip the scales to go to LTE. The 3 are mission critical push to talk. We have what we call a hydromet system, which is a weather station all up and down the river system. For the stuff that's on the river, it measures flows and altitudes, and so you can see where the floods are and everything like that. That's all. I mean, most of them are remote. And then we have an irrigation system down by the Gulf Coast, which is telemetry and gate operation. And so that's really only the 3 things inside of LCRA. The rest of them are with our customers. Our existing customers are either meter reading for electricity or water. And I didn't learn this. I knew it now, that there's more water meters than electric meters. So we're focused on water meters as well as mission critical push to talk for our distribution partners. We have, maybe not now, but we have 7,000 first responders radios on our 700 megahertz system that might need more telemetry in the future, and that will help us do that too. So we only have 3 use cases internally, but we got a lot more external use cases. Like I said, there's plenty of benefits. The key deal on the NPV is the AMI. And it doesn't really, we looked at it, so we looked at trigger points about where would this solution be a bad idea? And we looked at inflation, we looked at the cost difference between narrowband and LTE radio equipment. We looked at penetration of AMI, how much AMI do we have to do? We looked at several things, and really the key thing was the penetration of AMI. So in the whole footprint we have, which is 50,000 square miles, the tipping point for AMI was below 20%. So it's like, that really helped sell it to our board is, the likelihood we can get at least 20% when it gets popular enough to have everybody transition is pretty high.
Excellent. That's very helpful. Tanya, let's come back at now from risk perspective. I'm curious your thoughts on this. So again, from kind of what we can share, when I think about kind of hit this from the start, kind of the macro industry, issues and stuff that we have out there, a lot of these are not unique necessarily. I mean, the way they may manifest themselves are unique, but when I think about technical risk, operational risk, environmental, political, societal, things that all utilities are facing in some way, shape, or form, how do you view collaboration at that level, right? What can you learn from alignment, education, teaching, even to a certain extent, to help us with our grander cause?
This is my favorite part of the utility business, is that we can share. And I think for those of you that heard me before, I came from Target where you can't share. And this is awesome in utility that we can open the door and learn from each other in a very, very unique and open way with not only our peer utilities, but with partners. That's very unique and something we definitely need to take advantage of. Let me just share at Xcel, we have some unique challenges. We are in 8 states. We're a very diverse environment we're in. So, for example, we are in the plains area. We have a lot of mountains. We are in a lot of forestry area. And when you think about our telecommunications network and how we're going to get information from our AMI meters all the way where it needs to be, figuring out how to navigate all that landscape, that is something we can talk to our peers about. And we get really good information when we collaborate with vendor partners and with peer utilities about how they're managing that. How are they setting up their mesh networks? I know Kelly Bloch, who I'm filling in for today, she unfortunately was sick today, but one of her comments in sharing her notes about today was one of the things she's found great collaboration in is how do we manage wildfires? And that's something that being able to talk to peer utilities and talk about how do they manage that from a business perspective is extremely valuable. So we see collaboration as one of our strategic advantages, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. You went to wildfires. Actually, was going through my head, as we were thinking about it. Definitely and unfortunately, an issue that I'll argue is moving east across the country. Right? It's not just isolated anymore to the West Coast utilities or to the islands, as we unfortunately saw with Hawaii. But absolutely an area and a prime example of where very specific and unique skills are being built. Right? Experiences and use cases and partnerships and collaborations that. It's exciting to see that starting to move its way through education and stuff like that. In fact, one of the groups that we work with there was San Diego Gas and Electric, who did a really unique solution with falling conductor protection, even starting to see the application of it moving across into other utilities from a safety perspective, right? How do we use these capabilities and new solutions to be able to help enhance our capacity? So that's fantastic. Thank you, Tanya. Charles, maybe you can help pull some of this together, kind of more holistically as you think about the benefits of team and collaboration. What do you see holistically as kind of the value of that collaboration as you're embarking specifically on your LT, your 900 megahertz LT path, that folks can take advantage of, that you personally have learned for, and that you're looking to leverage going forward?
Yeah, a couple different angles on that, Ryan. One, and we've talked a lot, Tanya just touched it, about the industry level collaboration, right? I'd be repetitive, but it would reinforce that, right? Hugely beneficial, having come from a competitive industry model as well. This is a very different environment. And the ability to reach out, with a phone call, with an email, Teams, Zoom, whatever these days, and have that network there of connections to ask a question of and get immediate input and feedback, and do that, I'll say, at scale, huge value. The other aspect of the question, Ryan, I touched this a little bit yesterday, but is internal collaboration, because for us at least, the whole private LTE initiative was a chance to really bring us together internally as a company. I mentioned the IT/OT reference yesterday, and I'm kind of coming back to that. It was a chance to really partner across, I'll say, IT and the business with an opportunity that had not come along in quite some time, because we had really been in that repetitive model of core systems and enhancements and upgrades, and that frankly is a little fatiguing after a while, right? Because you do have, as Tanya said, multi-year projects. You do fatigue your commissions a bit with the repetitiveness of that model. This was a chance internally to collaborate on something brand new, different, that had a lot of strategic runway factor associated with it, again, from a vision perspective. It was going to resonate from a regulatory perspective, again, because of the customer benefit, because the starting point was distribution automation. It was the avoidance of outages. It was the minimization of the duration of outages, right, which resonated for customers. It resonated from a shareholder perspective because we were making a significant capital investment and we were pivoting from O&M. So that worked. It worked with internal finance teams. It worked with the board because of that, right? And then you layer on the security benefits that came with it as well. And so it was, again, it felt like a rare opportunity to execute on something strategic, but do it with pretty much unanimous, agreement to do so because of the, again, felt like the uniqueness of it.
Yeah, that's great. I hadn't thought about that part of it. That's fantastic, though, actually. Kind of how you can drive uniformity and collective from even across the whole utility, right? I think is what you're saying. Kind of technology and the fundamentals really drive and encourage people coming together. I absolutely love that. Okay, let's go through this next round. I said I want to come back now, kind of to basics. We started some of this stuff to get kicked off a little bit, and then we'll go to Q&A in the time that we have remaining. Obviously, underneath all of this, we're kind of talking first at the high level about the decision making, the stakeholder buy-in, how we learn and we share with others. But we know at the bottom of the day, it comes down to business cases, it comes down to use cases, it comes to real outcomes, right? And you three uniquely of the class of really starting to take this action and move forward are going to be facing those incremental kind of objectives soon, right? Some of you already in terms of how you realize it. So come at it both from the perspective of what specifically and uniquely you saw at the use case application level that really helped drive support and sometimes maybe even buy-in, because there's different attributes of how we think about it. And then maybe a little bit on, what you see as the role and how that plays out as you drive stakeholder buy-in going forward, demonstrating the realization of value and outcomes. Tanya, maybe we'll start with you with that one.
Yeah, I'll start with sharing an example, which is my favorite topic. We launched a program called Advanced Grid Intelligence and Security. It's a $1.8 billion program that lasts over 10 years. I've had the privilege to be a part of the technology leadership team leading that program. And the program has three big pillars. One is putting out advanced meters. So we've got smart meters on all of our customer homes. By the way, we're going to put out 3.8 million meters. We're about halfway there right now. We're really excited about that. The second thing we're doing is we're putting in a new distribution system. So we're putting in a Schneider Electric ADMS solution, which is going to give us a ton more visibility to our distribution grid, visibility that we quite frankly did not have previously. We didn't have a system in place. And then the third big, most important part of our program is our field area network. And, I think of the field area network as really like the glue that puts it all together, right? So, we've got data out there on our meters, we've got information out there on our distribution lines, and the only way we get value out of that data is we bring that data back. And we process all that data and we use that for insights for our business to drive information to our employees so they can better serve our guests, but also to give more information to our customers so our customers can have more information, more knowledge, more choice, and they're feeling more satisfied about us as a utility provider. So for me, the communication network is really foundational. It's the key to success when we want to deliver these strong business objectives to both our customers and to our employees.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I like the way Chris Vana put it earlier. It's kind of the articulation as the third grid, right? It's starting to really elevate the perspective of how important, transformational, and foundational, kind of the telecommunication side is going to be. And I think Xcel's been doing a fantastic job for a long time, recognizing it's also not about the parts, right? They're important, when they help hold it together, but it's the complementary nature of these different elements, some that have been in progress for some time, and then using the more advanced capabilities of a wireless network, like you said, to help glue some of that stuff together and extract even more value from the pieces that you've already invested in. I think it's fantastic. Okay, Ken, this is your chance. Let's come back to LCRA. Let's come back to some of the unique areas, that, and I put this in the context again of we see kind of use case development. UBBA does a fantastic job cataloging use cases, and the more diversity and expansive of these use cases, I think the more we're truly starting to demonstrate the breadth of capabilities that LT and kind of the standards-based platforms can bring. I know LCRA has identified some unique ones, as you're thinking about your scope of operations. Let's drill into a couple of those.
That's a great question, because I think we did a little bit differently, because I mentioned before that we had lots and lots of use cases that add up to like $180 million, and like, no, we're not doing all that stuff. Not yet. So we actually ended up, I think about it, like, I got a spade hand or bridge hand, I got 13 cards, and to sell it, we threw away all but 3, right? And so like, because we threw away the stuff that was visionary. Nah, that's the wrong word. We threw away the stuff that was aspirational and that would be cool for some people, but not a bunch of people. We had one use case was, we want to be able to have a computer in our substation so we can look at the 3D view of all the stuff in the substation and look at every piece of equipment's capabilities and all that stuff. Is like, but we're 10 years away from that, and there's no software to do that right now, so that's not really a use case. That's a benefit. So we really did pare down. It was like, we got to have push to talk, we got to make AMI successful, we got to be able to do general telemetry for all the different customers we have, and that it came down to the cost and the benefits, and the benefits were the value of what we think we could sell it for and how much we could sell it, price times volume, but the benefits was also strategic. So we actually, I sort of held when I remember the board meeting, we approved it, had something in my back pocket, because one of we're a state entity, like I said, so we can't do anything that's not in our enabling legislation, so we can't do stuff just because we want to. But in that enabling legislation is community service and sort of economic development. So the key thing was, if we go down this other path, we will not grow and we will probably shrink over time. If we go down the LTE path, there's not going to, unless we fail it, it's not going to shrink, and it's going to grow, and we're going to increase the business and increase sort of our mission. And so that was that closed the deal right there.
That's fantastic. Excellent. Yeah, and I think probably people, you hit at it, but people don't appreciate that, you've got a different side of the business, which is more directly commercial, right? And that, when you're talking about kind of thinking about the pricing and all that stuff, unique attribute of kind of how do you retail, right? How do you, outside of energy, kind of literally how do you think about telecom and ultimately retail? And I think there's a lot to learn, in terms of when we look, again, I'm forecasting 10, 15, 20 years. We talked about a little bit, Tanya, earlier. I don't think it's today's challenges for utilities, but when you start looking at some of the potentials of this kind of technology and what you can do more broadly, to yield societal benefits and other things of interest, there's a lot to learn from what you're doing.
It's visionary. I think somebody said that. It's like, you really got to figure out what you want to do, and is this the right direction over time, and then figure out how to get there. Because you mentioned it, I've had 20 years of regulation problems and cost and justification and prudence review and all that other sort of stuff. And so if the vision is there, you can make that work, I think. Yeah. It's not easy, but you can make it work.
I agree. Excellent. Charles, Kate, final summary on this. I'm going to pivot it a little bit differently. I'd love to hear, kind of a couple of your key use cases, but maybe then you foreshadow for us, right? What do you see 10 years from now, right? Because we're building now these foundations that we can grow on. What excites you that maybe you see in terms of future use cases, in addition to the ones that are really driving you today?
Yeah, I think the clocks are starting to run a little faster for us as utilities, right? Hopefully that makes sense than what they have historically. And so, I already talked about our near-term use cases around distribution automation, of course. But as we look a little bit further out, and it's not that far out, back to the clock reference, at least they're on our radar screen now, are things around EV use cases, of course. That's not that far out, but DER DER-DERMS, that's been referenced on panels already as well, right? Connectivity behind the meter, providing of services behind the meter, again, representing a little bit of a different provider than the historical view of the electric utility, perhaps. But again, if we don't do it, somebody else will, right? And so then further out, FERC 2222, right? Because there's several use cases there that will be dependent upon connectivity and data. Tanya touched that a minute ago, right? Because I really think the common denominator when we're talking about private LTE and what it enables is around connectivity and data. And so you start talking about vision, when we made the decision and the commitment, right, nobody could see the end in sight when it came to the need for additional connectivity, additional bandwidth in the field, and what the potential uses for that was going to be. And then there's a fine line between potential and needed, right, versus, or mandated, if you will, right? A little bit of a survival element back to the competitive industry model is starting to trickle into the utility industry, and thus that makes the clock run faster, and it creates a little more urgency to be more visionary and be ready, as opposed to, it's opportunity until it's threat, right? And I think that pivot within our industry is becoming a little bit more front and center than it has in the past.
Yeah, that's perfect. It reminds me too, I think Alan made this point on the previous slide. I think it's just a personality trait of humans. I think we underestimate, kind of what the potential opportunities are and the growth is going to be as you start putting these systems in place. And absolutely, it's going to be dependent and foundationally based off this data and this information system. So it's fantastic. Ken, you have something to add?
Yeah, well, I guess I want to hit the visionary thing one more time because and I didn't realize it until I sat up here with Tanya and Charles. My boss, the CEO of Evergy, CEO of Xcel, me and a couple other people all worked for the same company before. We all worked for the CEO of Evergy. Tanya's CEO used to be the CFO for this guy, and I didn't work for him, but he's the CFO, so he thought I did. So, but it was a very unregulated, cutthroat company. And I think that helped, as you said, the number 3, 4, and 5 choose the LTE.
Yeah, that's fascinating. No, excellent thought. Wonderful. I think we got time for a question or two, Bobby.
Maybe one.
Okay.
We've got one last panel before lunch. Anybody? Clearly you answered all the questions.
Fantastic. Excellent. No, I give full credit to the panel. Well, tell you what, parting shots then, literally 10 seconds or less. What's the most impactful piece of feedback, recommendations you can give to the next in line? Thinking of your entire journey. I know it's hard, to summarize it all down, putting you guys on the spot. Tanya, you want to take a shot?
Yeah, and I'm going to go back to what I said before, which is you cannot be successful unless you've got all your stakeholders engaged, on board, and sustaining their support. And to me, that's the most important aspect, and you've got to start early and plan for a solid duration and a solid foundation of communication.
Excellent. Charles?
Adding to that, building on stakeholders, maintaining that stakeholder involvement, and when I say it, I'm talking more internal right now, but through execution as well, right? It's not a decision up front, and then you go off in a vacuum and you start to execute. It's ongoing stakeholder engagement and involvement. We call it internally kind of a single team model between IT and OT, again, going at this. We all have our roles, but it's the same team. You're in the same boat, rowing in the same direction at the same time. That's how you get the velocity to get there faster, right?
Yeah, that's great. You got a vision, but you got to show results, right? Kind of while you're going. Ken?
Yeah, I would agree with them from an LCRA perspective. The thing I turn it to, what do I worry most about our implementation? One is forgetting to do something, or forgetting to plan on doing something. And we got an employee, Spencer over here. We hired him. It was like, please don't let us forget to do anything. It's like, oh yeah, oh wait a minute, oh we're 3 years down the road and forgot something. The other one is, how do you, for all the external customers, we got to sell it and we have to price it properly. We have to price it not at the cost, but at their value. And So that's what I'm worried about.
Yeah, it makes sense. I'll add, I think the collective benefits are one of those that hopefully help us see beyond the four corners and the four walls that we're operating within too. The more experiences we get collectively, hopefully you've got another set of eyes out there. They're starting to identify that stuff for you. But thank you. Fantastic input. Please, round of applause for our fantastic panel.